Hello, my name is Jacob Goldberg, and for my capstone this year, I did a podcast called More Than Just a Field, in which I investigated the global power of sports. So, my thesis statement and the guiding principles of what I was trying to investigate this year was whether or not through economic, political, and social influence, sports can both unite and divide the world. My first episode I did this year was with Keen. And they're such a good organization. Obviously, a lot of people, bullists in the community, know Keen. We work very heavily with them. I interviewed Miss Finnegan for the first part of it, in which we talked about how Bullis specifically has worked with Keen and what Miss Finnegan has seen over the years, how much more involvement there has been. And she just mentioned how great of an organization it is, how they bring together kids with special needs and obviously Bullis students to do exercise together, physical activity, and it's just a great way to build a connection around sports. And then I talked with Beth Wenger, who is the program director at Keene, and she talked to me about how her favorite part of Keene as a whole is not what she does during the week and all the work leading up to the events, but it's the actual events themselves. And when she finally gets to see her hard work in action and what it means for the kids when they're able to play sports at the end of the week and see the smiles on their face. So episode two was the Olympics, and the Olympics are obviously such a huge part of sports around the world. When you think of international sporting events, you usually think of the Olympics. And for this episode, I talked with Bullis alum Caroline Queen, and we talked about how the Olympics have affected her life and about how the games are a force for positive change all around the world. I asked her questions such as how was her Olympic experience and how was she able to use sports to create a sense of peace and community with both her fellow U.S. athletes and the international ones. My third episode was with the Peaceplayers, and the Peaceplayers are another organization that Bullis has worked with in the past, and they're just another great organization. Obviously, you see on the bottom their photo, they bridge divides, they develop leaders, and they change perceptions. And they're a huge international organization. They've got programs set up in Israel and Palestine to build connections between the two. They've got some all over the Mediterranean and Europe. They have some in Africa and South Africa, in Egypt. They have some in Asia, and they have some in the United States in Chicago, LA, and they have one in Baltimore. So I spoke with Sean Brown, who is the program director in the Baltimore region, and he really talked about how kids in Baltimore, they use this program to obviously build peace with other kids in Baltimore, but to build social connections and to see their city a little bit more. He said they do more than just basketball. They obviously play, they have practice to build a community sense with the other kids in their city, but they also go on programs and go on tours of their own city to the historical sites that they may never have seen and really just learn more about the place where they live, because a lot of the kids who live in Baltimore have never seen some of the historical sites. So I just thought that was very interesting what Sean was saying about that. And then my last episode was a two-part series. Um, First, I interviewed Miss Orr about her involvement in professional basketball. Many people in the Bulls community know that she played professional basketball, and you can see on the bottom the business of basketball. There is such a huge salary gap between men's or the NBA and the WNBA, and we've gotten such a far way. It used to be a much bigger gap, but you could still see that there's such a far way to go. And Miss Orr talked about whether or not she faced any discrimination while pursuing her career, her time at Duke, and whether or not she if she could tell the lack of difference between equality with the men's team and the women's team and the funding and everything. And she did mention that obviously the stands were a lot less crowded for her games than they were for the boys' games, and that's just something she always remembered. Um, and then for the second part of this episode, I talked with Mariana and Ruby, and they're also two capstone class members, and they've been doing their podcast all year on women in high school and equality. And they partnered with me for a sports episode. And we talked about Title IX and sports for girls in high school and the equality there and just sports in general. And once again, how there's so much further to go. And Title IX obviously talks about how no one can be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So just another important thing in terms of women trying to get involved in sports all around the country. And thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'll be accepting questions.